So recently the ABC did a 7:30 segment called Power Play, and we've had a lot of people communicating with us saying that it's making them a bit worried about getting solar, or if they've already got solar, making them worried about what the future holds for their solar system. It made a lot of interesting points. It's good to see that solar's popular in the media, but we thought it would be useful for Ronald and I to go through it and maybe challenge some of the implications in the report. So, ready for you? Watch some TV with me, Ronald?
I was born ready.
Let's do this.
We wanted to get solar panels for a long time, just to try and save $1. The main key, if I could have saved $300-400 a year, that would have been awesome.
Okay, so we've got this gentleman in Victoria who, looking at his roof, we reckon, 11 kilowatt system probably?
Yeah, they have a shot. I've seen it. I counted the panels. Looks maybe 10, 12 kilowatts.
So without wanting to spoil it for you, we soon learn that he can't export any of his energy to the grid. Either he can't export the energy or he's getting paid zero for it, which are subtly different. Because if you're export limited, there's literally no energy going into the grid. If you've got a zero feed-in tariff, you're pumping that energy into the grid and you're getting zero for it. He seems to think that he is pumping the energy into the grid and getting zero for it. He may be confused about how export limiting works. We don't know. But, I mean, if you're getting zero for your exported energy, that cripples the payback of your system.
Yes. For a big system especially. If you have a small system, it still makes sense. Big system, it can take 15, 20 years to pay for itself. That's the simple payback time.
Yeah, now one of the really important points here is, and he says it right at the end actually, he says, if I'd known that I couldn't export my energy to the grid, I'd have never have bought the solar system. Well, that's interesting because A, that's probably fairly sensible, or you might have got a smaller system that paid back quicker, but the standard process for buying solar is you get a quote, you choose an installer, the installer goes and gets permission to connect to the grid. That's when you find out if you've got an export limit. The installer has that conversation with the customer, goes, oh, Fred, they're not going to let you export any energy to the grid. Do you still want to go ahead? Or do you want a smaller system? Or do you want to think about self-consumption? What doesn't happen, or shouldn't happen, obviously it has here, is you install your solar and then find out you can't export it to the grid, because that's just not how it should work. So there's been a breakdown in communication somewhere. Well, he's just said, when I paused it, he'd be happy if he saved $300-400 a year.
Well, he is.
So
if he's got average electricity consumption, he's taking a big chunk off his electricity use in the daytime. For that huge system, he'll be using next to no electricity in the day, even on cloudy Melbourne days. As assuming he's got more or less typical.
I mean, as soon as the sun comes above the horizon, he's going to be generating a lot of electricity with a big system.
Yeah.
So he seems to be implying that he's not saving anything with this system. And you probably know, we certainly know that's not how it works. Solar savings come from A, self-consumption, which he still gets when the sun's up, and then B, the export earnings, which he's not getting. So if you've got an 11 kilowatt system in Victoria, you have to self-consume less than about 10% in order to save less than $400 a year. So he's almost certainly is actually saving $400 a year, I would have thought, unless he's using bugger all electricity during the day.
That's right.
He's going.
Last month, plumber Matt Pillsbury installed solar panels on his home, hoping it would not just save him money, but help him make some too.
We thought we'd put a good system in and try and save some money and pay for a holiday or who knows what else.
For more than a decade, solar panel owners have been offered what's called a feed-in tariff, which means they get paid for the surplus energy they send to the grid. But with so much cheap solar power being pumped back into the grid, many households are no longer being paid for their excess power.
They need to explain that better. No one is getting their feed-in tariff. No one who has solar is getting their feed-in tariff taken away from them. That's yours. You get to keep that. It may go down, but it's not going to be yanked away from you.
Yeah.
It's only people who install new solar who may be told, local area can't handle anymore, you're zero export limited, or you just can't export as much as in the past.
that zero export for new solar systems is a small problem that seems to be growing quite quickly.
In Victoria, in parts of Melbourne, it's a big problem. It's very common. But yeah, it's not being yanked away from people. It's for new systems only. That's a very important point.
So the entity that decides if you've got zero export limit is your DNSP, your distributed network service provider. Some are better than others. For example, PowerCore, which I suspect is where this gentleman is really dishes them out like there's no tomorrow from what we've heard.
We found out that we couldn't pump back into the grid, so we couldn't get any money back. Yeah, it sort of backfired a little bit. It was sort of $8,500 and I'm not getting anything back. I've just been pumping energy back into the grid for free and not saving a single dollar.
Again, if he's export limited, he's actually not pumping anything into the grid, which is probably what's happened.
Australians have this love affair with solar.
Australia has one of the highest uptakes of household solar in the world. It's skyrocketed from just 0.2% of households in 2007 to 20% now. And in a decade, 50% of us are predicted to have solar panels.
Unless the ABC keeps putting this stuff out.
Yeah.
But that growing popularity has come at a price.
The grid, the poles and wires, was set up to get power from generators to your house, not from your house back into the grid.
The Australian Energy Market Commission, the expert group that sets the rules for the electricity grid, says it's now being flooded with more power than it was designed to handle.
Right, Ben Barr, a man whose parents obviously had lots of spare letters, because it's BENNBARR, is 100% right. The grid wasn't designed to accept distributed solar from rooftops, but it doesn't matter. It still works. It's not a huge problem. We can work around these things.
It's not a huge problem, but they do need to modify the grid if too much starts going the other way.
Yeah, and it's a dumb system at the moment. It's not, they look at the worst case scenario and they put the limit there rather than what could be done if things are more intelligent.
Yeah, that's because they've got no visibility of what's happening.
That's right.
One of the expensive things they need to do, relatively expensive, is put instrumentation all over the distribution network so they can see what's happening.
Yeah.
But
or
yeah.
just go straight to smart inverters, which they were trialling here in South Australia. Variable output, variable exports.
Making the network unstable and raising the risk of future blackouts. Ben Barr is the Commission's chief executive.
We're seeing it in South Australia where to keep the system stable, the grid operator is looking at times, turning off customers' solar PV on their houses. And if that happens, they can't earn any money.
So I think Ben could have been clearer there. In South Australia, where we are, we're leading the world in this stuff because we've got so much solar. Yes, the DNSPs do want to switch off your solar, except they don't have to switch the whole thing off. They can just stop your... in South Australia, we're happy to just cut off the exports, but the solar system still works in your house.
Yeah.
And sensible people will, if they're buying a system now, they will buy a system that can do that. So when they hit the big switch, your system isn't completely gone. You don't have to start buying energy from the grid. You're still using all that solar energy in your house.
And I'll point out, it may only be an hour or two a year, so that's not a big deal.
At the moment, the only way of solving this problem is actually building more and more poles and wires, which everybody pays for.
That's why the Australian Energy Market Commission is proposing radical reforms to pricing. The changes would mean electricity companies could actually charge solar owners to export energy to the grid when it's busy, as opposed to paying them for it.
This is really important. She's implying that you're going to get fined, essentially. You're going to have to pay for the privilege of putting electricity into the grid. That's not what they're proposing. They're proposing taking 2 cents off your feed-in tariff. So if you're getting paid 10 cents to export a kilowatt hour, at certain times you'll only get 8 cents. So you're still getting paid to export to the grid.
Yeah.
So please don't be misunderstood there. If feed-in tariffs in the future drop so low, less than 2 cents essentially, then you would be fined for putting your energy into the grid. But that wouldn't happen either because you just configure your solar system not to export at those times. So it wouldn't cost you anything.
That's right.
But companies will still offer payment for solar power when more energy is needed on the grid.
They'll pay you more at certain times as well. That's a really important point. It's not just take.
Yes.
And by that, you allow this two-way pricing and incentives for when the power is needed. Charge up, in the middle of the day when your solar is generating, and get it back into the grid at night or at 6 p.m. when the grid needs it.
So you don't necessarily need a battery to benefit?
Yeah, Ben Barr was clearly talking about a battery there. They're expensive now, but
so
come down.
The reason, one of the things they haven't really made clear is the whole reason for this new pricing mechanism is to try and solve the problem of zero export that the guy with the 11 kilowatt system has.
Yeah.
Like, if we want to stop that becoming more and more frequent, we actually want to stop people getting told they can't export to the grid when they buy a new solar system. This is one of the solutions. It's not close to the perfect solution, but it's a solution that hopefully the state governments and the DNSPs, who are the two guys who we need to get on board, can agree to. And that's what's important. If we hold out for the perfect solution, we're just going to go on forever until we've got the perfect solution. More and more people are going to get zero export limited, and that's bad for everyone. So in the perfect world, your ivory towers or whatever, it's a suboptimal solution. Yes, it is, but it's a negotiation with the DNSPs and the state governments. It's not a competition to find the perfect, most fair solution.
Yes, the perfect should not be the enemy of the good.
And it's quite urgent, because
Yeah.
gentlemen like the plumber from Melbourne can't export to the grid.
The Energy Market Commission argues its proposal will not be a big financial hit on those who can afford solar panels. They estimate returns for a medium-sized house will drop from $970 a year to $900.
You get a good return from solar, and it's not going to, make it uneconomic for customers to put it on their roof.
Ben from AEMC. AMC has smart cookies. I'm very confident they're confident in those numbers. And I sanity checked them and they seem good to me. Okay. And the point he makes, which is kind of a bit buried towards the end of the, after the painted all the doom and gloom, is solar's still a good deal. Ben's absolutely right.
Yes.
The AEMC says any changes are at least 4 years off, and the support of state governments is needed before the proposed rules become a reality.
Okay, Queensland has to change well before 4 years. And other places too, because we can't wait 4 years to sort these things out.
If all these renewable energy activists carry on jumping up and down and having petitions and pressuring the government, nothing's going to happen for a lot longer than 4 years, and we're all going to be in a terrible situation. So let's just agree to it, man.
What are you doing?
If you'd known that you couldn't sell it back to the grid before you installed it, would you still have gone ahead?
Probably not, no. The only thing that I've sort of thought of now is just going to cost me more money is to put a battery in where I get to keep the energy and save it, but it's just a little bit out of the cost range at the minute.
Interestingly, this change goes ahead. DNSPs will have to offer Matt an export level, and that means he can actually pay off his system much, much quicker than, it's probably a 17-year payback at the moment. Something like that. He'd be able to pay it off in less than 6, you would have thought.
Yeah.
So the program's railing against the solution to Matt's problem, which is ironic.